And welcome to today's video. My name is Jeannie. I am a 6'2" self-projected projector. I have a defined head, ajna, throat, and G-center, and they're all connected straight down the middle channels, which are all part of individual circuitry. I've got Meatball to my right here. He's eating his food and kind of like throwing it all over the place. I'm so excited to be filming outside again. The weather's nice again, and I really do love filming outside more than I do inside. I'm also going to do my best to be more mindful of speaking up. I do have a microphone plugged into my phone, but I'm finding that people are still saying it's not loud enough. And whenever I feel like I have to raise my voice, I don't know, maybe it's like a no motors to the throat type of thing, where I feel like it really strains my vocal cords and I can't talk for as long as I normally can when I'm in my more comfortable range. So if the audio is still quite low, I'm working on it. I am going to try to come up with other solutions, or if you guys have any suggestions, by all means feel free to leave a comment down below and help me out. And that way I would love feedback. So now I'm going to talk about what we're going to be talking about in this video. I was asked if I could talk about being an individual and how that relates to melancholy. And this is actually the second time I filmed this video, because I feel like last night when I filmed it, it was a little bit choppy. And now that I've kind of had a little bit more time to sit with what I wanted to say, I want to see it's going to flow out better, but we'll see. I had a little bit of difficulty remembering how I've experienced melancholy in the past. I'm talking like my youth, my childhood, teenage years, and like young adult life. Part of the reason of that is because of trauma brain. When you've been through a lot of trauma for a long period of time, your brain can block out memories, and I'm still slowly been regaining access to those. So that was one of the reasons why I felt like I couldn't quite remember. The other thing that came to me is how I think I've always been very blessed that I had my mom and we got along so well. And I think I mentioned this in my first video on pure individuals. I do have a line 2 in my Radiance sphere from a gene key perspective. So I would encourage you to go look at your Radiance sphere, the line, and see how you can, or what connections you can make with how melancholy might play out in your life. But first I'm going to talk about my experience, and then we're going to talk about like what to do about the melancholy. From a line 2 Radiance sphere's perspective, line 2s thrive in one-to-one relationships, and this doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a relationship with a person. Line 2s require biofeedback, which means that your radiance will emerge when you are in nature or when you are in movement, or both. So you need to be in an intense relationship with someone or something. And some questions that the information encourages you to contemplate is, what do you love doing, who do you love being with, and what will you marry your life force with? So when you have a line 2, you often find like that one thing or one person or one place that lights you up, and until you give your attention to that relationship, your radiance will remain in a sense unplugged. And there's this kind of like characteristic of requiring exclusivity, and I tend to be like really mindful of this because I could lean more towards codependent tendencies, which is what I had with my mom. But I tend to kind of like, the way it works in my brain is like I break up my life like before mom and after mom. Before mom, I want to say that I didn't experience as much melancholy as I did after she passed away, because I had that one-on-one intense relationship that helped my radiance emerge. My mom was also like a really good sounding board. She held as much space for me as I needed, even though like we didn't know that I was a projector. We didn't know any of this information. It was just a relationship that really, really worked. I felt safe, I felt comfortable, I felt seen, I felt supported. So if there were moments where there was melancholy, I want to say it was kind of like very short lived, and maybe that's why I don't have any memories of it, or I didn't really experience that, because my mom was really good at kind of keeping me active and engaging with life. Mom was more extroverted than I was. She liked being around people. She also liked spending time like alone with me, or time by herself. I was the one that had more resistance towards people, and I think it was because I was picking up on so much from my environment and picking up on so much information from people, and I didn't realize that's what was happening. So I tended to feel very overwhelmed and tired and exhausted when I was around a lot of people. So I liked more quiet time, smaller groups, things like that. So again, I can't quite recall moments before mom where I did experience melancholy. Not like I experience it now, because after she passed away, obviously I lost my person. I lost that one-to-one relationship. I lost this intense relationship, this exclusive relationship. And by exclusive, I mean that I had access to her whenever I wanted and needed, and there was no time constraint. I could take up as much space as I needed. She would drop anything and everything she was doing if she knew that I needed her. But like, we also spent like a lot of time together. I always say like we literally spent anywhere from 95% to 99% of the time together because it was just, we were best friends. Like, not only was she my mother, but she was my best friend. So after mom, that's where I started feeling the melancholy more, and it wasn't just about the grief, which makes sense, you know, when you're going through grief, melancholy is this deep, profound sadness. But as I started diving more into circuitry, I think that's what made more of an impact. That information made more of an impact on my life. Like, I was just like blown away by learning about circuitry, because, you know, all my channels are part of individual circuitry. That's why I think the information really, really helped me. But I started to notice how, okay, the information says that melancholy arises in individuals if they can't share what they know, or if they can't share their insights. And this would depend on like which individual channels you have. I have the one of awareness, the channel of awareness, the channel of structuring, and the channel of inspiration. So what I want to share is more like thoughts, the G center, myself, love, direction, use my voice to share my insights. So there's this, for me in particular, especially like being self-projected, there's a very huge component of needing to express my truth and letting whatever wants to flow out. And when I don't have that, it's like all that energy is just stuck inside of me. And this can and does produce a lot of melancholy, because I'm like, well, I don't have anyone to share this with. I'm stuck inside my head. These thought loops are looping and looping and looping. And even though I have a lot of awareness around this, it can take quite a bit of effort to break out of the thought loops. And it's like once they start, you have to wait for the break in order for them to be interrupted, and then kind of like either go into the thought loop again, or you're able to like get out of it and, you know, think about something else or do something else. So I personally started to notice a huge shift in my energy when I started to create these outlets, these creative outlets for me to express what was brewing inside of me. For me, it was YouTube. Like, all of a sudden I got this idea, like, oh, what if I went on YouTube and started talking about this? And it wasn't necessarily with the intention of like I want to get like X amount of subscribers. It was more of like, I need to get this out, and I don't have anyone to talk to right now. And I mean, I do, but like they can't hold the amount of space that I need right now, because it had been like years and years of like being very, very like, you know, closed off to people because of the grief, because of like how much I was taking other people's sadness about what had happened to us as a family and things like that, and amplifying that, where I really like, I felt so much better being alone. I needed to be alone in order to be able to process my grief and not feel like I was processing my grief and plus, you know, all these other people's sadness and stuff like that. So I got this idea, what if I start, you know, just processing stuff out on YouTube, sharing what I'm learning and just putting it out there. If someone comes across it, great, but it'll give me that opportunity to get some of the stuff that's, you know, it feels like it's building this pressure inside of my head. It gives me the opportunity to get it out there, and if it helps someone, great. That was my intention. Like, my intention was like to help myself feel better, not necessarily, you know, to get subscribers or things like that. And it eventually shifted because I started saying, okay, recently there's been a little bit more feedback. There's been a few more invitations, you know, in the comments, hey, can you talk about that? Or I would love if you talk about this, you know. And I'm like, oh yes, I would love to talk about that. And when there are these interactions, like, I see how my energy shifts. I see how I want to like go back to creating content and talking about things. And I feel like in January, I really kind of like fell off the creative wagon, because in January, it was my dad's 1-year anniversary of his death. And a week after that, my brother went out of town. And I dropped him off at the airport. I had never been to the airport. Well, I think I had, but I never like drove myself. And the airport, like, it can be quite tricky because there's all these signs, and if you get on the wrong, you know, lane, and it was very overwhelming. And it also brought a lot of things up to the surface for me, you know, this huge fear of being alone, which I had never really felt because I was always very much surrounded by people. I do now see how I experience like emotional neglect, but at a subconscious level, I just felt like if I had people around me that I knew would like be there for me the moment I said I need help, I didn't feel alone. And now afterwards, you know, mom's no longer here, dad's no longer here, brother's out of town, like, it's just you. It brought up a lot of things. But January was very intense for me. I got really inside my head, and I noticed the melancholy like really, really creep in. And it was really amplified, and it felt a lot like, what's the point of it all? What's the meaning of life? Like, what am I doing? Like, you're not getting anywhere. Like, you're not receiving invitations. Your job, like what you do for work, you're not in love with it anymore, and you need money, and, you know, all these thoughts that are just compounding. But what kind of like really amplified that was that I stopped creating content. So when you give yourself a creative outlet, your energy is going to increase, your motivation is going to increase, and the melancholy is going to decrease. And now I think this is so much easier to do because of YouTube, because of Instagram, and it doesn't only have to be that. If you are an artist, you can use art, you can use singing, dancing, exercise, movement, like so cooking, like so many different things. Like, when we think of creativity, I think that sometimes we can be very like, creativity has to look like this, but creativity can be anything, like creating. What is something that you love to create? Is it writing poetry, cooking, I don't know, animals? Like, I love animals. So, you know, you can feel into that and see and start exploring these different areas that maybe you haven't quite given yourself permission to explore. And that really helps with the melancholy. And as I was kind of like doing a little bit of research around individuals and melancholy, because I couldn't quite see it from my experience how I related to that, I came across this like very short 5-minute raw lecture, and he mentions this where if you're an individual, in order to decrease the melancholy, give yourself a creative outlet. So I'm like, oh, I was right on the right track, because like intuitively I was already doing this. So creativity. Another thing that I mentioned in the video that I did before this one that I don't know if I'm going to release that or not, but I mentioned how I am learning or starting to like really integrate myself with the community, because I recognize the importance and like how that helps keep me healthy, being like aligned to Radiance sphere person, where I need these one-to-one connections. And I use this visual of a scale, okay, where at one end we have alone time, and at the other end of the spectrum of the scale we have being with people. What I was doing after Mom passed away is that I was spending all my time over here on this end of being alone. And it was what I needed, because the grief was a lot to process. I didn't have the tools to be able to process the grief. I didn't have the support. Or I did have the support, but I didn't want to let it in because it didn't look like what I was used to, and it felt uncomfortable, and I didn't like it. I didn't want it. It was maybe more like I gravitated from like completely alone to like letting Dad and my brother and maybe like a very few, 1 or 2 friends in. And now, where like as opposed to, for example, when Mom was around, I was more like on this side of like interacting more with people, but not to like fully being in the middle of the of the crowd or the circle. I get the image of kind of like diving into the deep end of the pool. That's kind of like what this feels like to me. And this over here feels more like being, you know, just dipping your toes, or like sitting on the edge of the pool and just putting your feet in the water, or like sitting in one of the chairs and not necessarily being in the pool, you know, but it's the scale. And what I have found is that at different stages of life, depending on what I'm going through, depending on what I'm processing, I find myself moving along the scale depending on what I need. Recently, I've realized that I've been spending like all this time over here, like too much isolation, too much alone time, where it was affecting my mental health. I was experiencing a lot more melancholy, less motivation, less energy. It was hard to get out of bed. It was hard to work. So I'm starting to see the importance and the value of being around people, and mainly being around the right people. So now I'm slowly moving myself more towards this direction, but I'm going at a very slow, intentional pace. I am really like tuning into my body. I've been doing somatic practices that help my body release the stored trauma, regulate my nervous system, and I'm finding that I'm feeling much more grounded and more comfortable being around people. Like I'm not taking so much stuff in. I'm getting really, really good at observing and not absorbing. So I'm in the process of moving more towards this side of the scale, and you know, feeling into like what feels comfortable right now. So I'm going from like all the way of this extreme of complete isolation to about here. Like I feel like I'm at about here. And also the size of the group, and very large groups, like I tend to have this window of tolerance that I'm learning for it to get bigger and bigger. But because like for example, I'm in this program where I'm learning more about the mind-body connection, and we have mentoring calls on Tuesdays, which is smaller groups, about like 5 to 6 people. And I'm finding like that that group in particular feels really comfortable to me, as opposed to like our Thursday calls, which are with like the entire class. Whoever wants to show up can show up. The first call we had was small. It was maybe around like 10, 15 people, maybe less than that. Let's say around 10 people, and it still felt okay. There was a point where I was starting to feel really, really sleepy and really, really tired, but I think it wasn't just about the group. It's like there's so much information that I'm kind of at that place where like I'm ready to receive, and something's happening at a cellular level, because I feel that tired of like I need to sleep, because I feel like I can feel the difference in like the tiredness. It's not like the tired I feel when I'm being drained by people. It's this tired, sleepy feeling I get when I know my body's integrating things at a cellular level and it needs to sleep in order to kind of like, you know, do that process more easily, like without resistance or interruption. So last week, the session I attend, which is at noon, because the other one's at 5 a.m. and I'm not much of a morning person. I try to make it, but I'm like, I need sleep. So I decided just to go for the noon one and catch the replays on the 5 a.m. one. But the group last week was much bigger, and I noticed how I didn't feel at ease, and I didn't feel like super comfortable compared to like the week before that. So I'm learning to kind of like take that into account, and it doesn't mean that I'm never going to be comfortable within a group that large. It's just right now where I'm at, the group felt like it was like way a little bit more up here, and I'm kind of still like more comfortable up here. We're working our way up, right? So I've been learning to use my body to tap into cues of like, what do I need? Is the group too big? Because like, well, if you're a projector, like I find that I'm quite sensitive to the energy around me. So let's say I'm around a lot of generators or mani-gens, and especially like if they're things that are out of alignment, it's too much for me. So I'd rather kind of like, what I practice is finding a spot in the room, kind of thinking of the pool analogy, where sometimes I feel like I just need to be like in a lounge chair quite a distance away from like, you know, the people in the pool. Other times, you know, I'll start there and then I'll move my way closer, like, you know, just putting my feet in the water, things like that. But like I'll feel into it, and I'll feel into like my body. What is my body telling me? How do I feel? If I'm experiencing muscle aches and pains, it's probably a sign that it's time to go home or like recharge or go take a nap. It's too much. Another thing that I look out for is, do I feel sleepy? Do I feel tired? Do I feel drained? Or are the people I'm interacting with, do I feel energized? What when I'm around them? What's the matter, Bubba? Hi, come here. Come here, you want to say hello? Say hi. I had an accident a few weeks ago and I scared my mama. And now I have a snotty nose because I'm getting over something. Hi. We hope you feel better, Bubba. Yeah. And I try to sneak in the house every time I can. Right now, I think this is like my one-on-one relationship. And that's another thing that happened in January. He got injured and I didn't know what was wrong with him. I didn't know if he was going to make it or not. So that was intense. Okay. I was talking about feeling and like using your body to gauge whether or not you need alone time. Another concept that I kind of already talked about is fractal. Take a look at the fractal you're in right now. If it's a fractal that's draining you, not only like draining you, it could be financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually. If you're feeling drained by them, what I do is I say thank you for the lessons. Like I'll see, what are the lessons? What did I learn? What do I need to, or what do I want to integrate? Say thank you. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to like say goodbye to that fractal. Maybe sometimes it's a matter of having a conversation and asking for what you need, or what you would like, and then asking the person or people, are you available to provide that for me? And then if it's a yes, great. If it's a no, well, then you get to decide whether or not it's a dynamic or relationship or an interaction you still want to participate in. So for me, it was more of like letting the fractal in. Another thing that I noticed is that like I would start meeting people on certain calls that I would be on, and I would start forming like these relationships, these friendships with them. And I started to feel like really, really good, because we would have like these really awesome conversations. And I was also being very mindful to not develop these codependent tendencies. And then what would happen is, because like these are people that have jobs, they have, you know, work and other things and relationships, their lives are quite full. My life right now feels a little bit empty, in the sense that I have a lot of time freedom. I do have a lot of work to do, but I'm starting to see where it's like maybe not the best type of work for a projector. And I'm learning to like adjust and see, okay, what can I do, staying with that for the time being while I continue to establish, you know, maybe establish an online presence and maybe get more invitations through that way. But I'm finding like I have a lot of time freedom, so being mindful of that and not putting so much pressure on like one person. Like I think of one friendship that I made where we really spent like weeks talking, and I just noticed how much I thrived, and not only, you know, having that one-on-one interaction, but it also gave me an opportunity to share my insights, and they benefited because like they got to experience like this very mutative quality that is built into pure individuals. But then I noticed that sometimes, again, because they have a busier life than I do at the moment, I was able to provide more space for them than they were able to provide for me, which made sense because they have a busier schedule. So that helped me create awareness around this, and like, okay, are you feeling resentful? Are you feeling bitter? Are you feeling like you wish you had more people like that in your life? And what can you do to provide that those things for yourself, instead of like projecting onto this person that they're not there for you, or they're not holding as much space for you. And not that I did that, like I had a lot of awareness around this, and I was able to see it more as information, like, okay, this is letting me know what I want more of. And I was also experiencing like a lot of neck pain, and it took me forever to make this connection. But one of the things that I kept saying is like, oh, I feel like if I could only connect like my head to the next to the rest of my body, I would feel so much better. And then this was recent that I made this connection. I'm like, oh, the word I keep on using is connection. So what my body wants is more connection, more interaction with people. And I've been resisting that because of the fear of rejection that can be quite a big theme in people with individual circuitry. Needing to open up my circle and not have it, because like in my mind, you know, my people or my family, and right now my family's basically been cut in half, and I'm like, okay, not ideal, we can't do anything about that, we accept it at a deeper level. What can we do to start opening ourselves up, opening our heart, opening ourselves to love, to be able to let more people in? And it doesn't have to be like a lot of people, just start letting some people in, and that's going to help you see that people are safe. That just because that was your experience before, now you have more knowledge, you have more tools, you're more familiar with you know you even have a chart. Right? So I'm using what I know about like human design and my gene keys, where before it was more like I was using that information, right? It was my focus was on like gaining more knowledge, but I wasn't really putting it into practice, into like the real life application part of it. And that's where like all the fun stuff happens, like when you start applying this stuff and you start seeing like how does this play out in real life, which I think maybe that's why the experience, which, you know, 41, I have gene key 41 as my conscious sun, gate 41, and 41 has a lot to do with experiences, where people who really like a variety of experiences. And I think that before mom, she was the way through which I had a lot of experiences through life. After she passed away, the experiences kind of went, you know, they really tanked. And now I'm like, okay, more of like taking my power back and seeing how can I start opening myself up to like those experiences. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to let people in on having those experiences with me, but again, finding kind of like that balance on the scale, because like when I was thinking about like how do I balance this needing alone time and melancholy, or like let's take the alone time, because I've noticed like sometimes when I'm really in my head, I'll feel the urge or the nudge to go for a walk. When the weather's nice, I really do my best to fit in a 15-minute walk daily. Recently it's been cold, I'm hot, thirst, determination, and the body does not love being cold. And also because I haven't been good at letting a lot of people in, I feel like that also reflects in like how cold my body can get. Like I don't feel that loving warmth from others because I'm not allowing it in, so I can feel like a lot colder. But anyways, I started going on walks, and then my brother noticed I was going on walks. He's like, oh, next time you go, let me know. Or what I started doing is I'm like, I would let him know, hey, I'm going for a walk. Do you need anything before I go out? Or like, I'll be back in 15, 30 minutes. And then he'd say, oh, let me go with you. So he would join me on my walk, and there were times where like I had something that I wanted to work out, you know, a lot of mental pressure, and I was going on this walk very intentionally to work out the mental pressure, and then he decides he wants to come with me. And part of me wanted to say, or felt like I don't want anyone with me, but right now, because of the grief and kind of like how Dad's sudden death really put a lot of things into perspective, what I personally am prioritizing is my connection to or with my brother. We are 16 years apart. I find it's much easier for me to adapt to his interests than he adapts to mine. He doesn't hold as much space for me to be able to like talk things out. So any opportunity that I can get to connect with him, like I go for it. So like on these instances where I feel like I want the alone time, but it's more important for me to connect with him. Now, this is where I'm going to bring in this concept. It's not even a concept. This factor of communication. Let's say I'm really in my head, like we have a pretty good relationship, my brother and I, where if there's anything that needs to be talked about, any hard conversations, like we are pretty like at that point where we can have these hard conversations and not like project onto each other or things like that. But let's say I'm really in my head, I'm telling him like I'm gonna go for a walk, and he says like I'd like to come with you. I feel comfortable enough to say like, if I really need the alone time, and say I would love for you to join me right now, there's something I need to work through, so I would like to go on this walk alone. I love you. Nothing personal. So using our words to communicate our needs. Another thing, or another way I could do that is say, you know what, I feel like I really need to work something out. I'm going to go on a 5-minute walk just by myself, and then I'm going to come back, and I would love for you to join me on the rest of the walk. And then of course, like, you feel into it. What is it that you feel that you need, and use your words to communicate to your loved one or your significant other what it is that you need. And this is where, you know, if they get triggered or something like that, it's more like stuff that they have to work on. I'm not saying that we can't help them, but we're not responsible for like how other people take things. This doesn't mean that we're going to be rude or anything like that. I think that if we come from a very loving, open, vulnerable place of saying, you know, this is what I need and this is why, and you know, maybe because there are people who love us, they want to help us resolve the issue or whatever. We can say, you know what, I know you really want to help me, but right now I feel like I need time to sort this out, and then when I'm ready, I would love to talk to it. I would love to talk to you about what's on my mind. So communicating, learning to communicate with our friends, family, partners, spouses, children, and using our words to let people know what it is that we need, what it is that we want, because people aren't mind readers. It's a very big lesson I've had to learn, which would have been very helpful in like relationships. But the last thing I'm gonna say for now is like maybe tying it into relationships. When mom was still alive, I think I settled a lot in relationships, and in like from a relationship perspective, I think I do behave more as a line 3, and line 3s tend to have this fear of commitment. So I felt like in the past in relationships, it's felt more like I wanted out because I felt suffocated. I felt, you know, and also like the type of people that I was attracting, there were men who were more in their feminine and I was more in my masculine, so this kind of really messed up with like the polarity of the relationship. And I felt like in relationships, that's when I felt like I needed, romantic relationships, I needed and wanted more alone time, but it was because there were relationships that weren't necessarily in alignment. It was what I attracted because it was what I was available for, and they were like teaching me what I needed to learn in those moments, even though I didn't know that's how it worked. But I definitely had a lot more issues around people or like guys saying, you know what, you said you were gonna call me and you didn't call me, or like, why don't you want to hang out, or why do you like, do you not love me, do you not want to spend time with me? But they were relationships that felt draining. So I preferred more time alone versus being with that person. But again, I didn't know, like I had awareness around like how I felt and how things were playing out, but I didn't know why. I have gate 61. Why? Like I didn't know why things and that, or why things were happening, or you know, things like that. And once I've been able to get to the why, it's like, oh, okay, now I understand this at a deeper level and I know what to do about it. So now I'm kind of like a little bit curious to see like how this would play out in relationships now that, especially like mom's not here. So I don't know, maybe once I start like experimenting with that and seeing how it plays out in my life, I'll do an updated version to this, because it has been about 10 years since I've been in a relationship. I've definitely learned a lot. I think I am definitely at a much, vibrating at a higher frequency where I'm more, I see the probability of attracting a person that really does fit into like my values and what I wanted and what I've kind of like dreamed about. It feels like it's more of a possibility now as opposed to like before. So that's what I have to say about melancholy and alone time. I'm not quite sure if that covers or if that answers the question or the comment that was left. If you guys have any more questions, I find like that the more specific you can get, it's a little bit easier. And also, I don't know, like I feel like when I do these, because I've gone live on my Instagram sometimes and people join me and they ask questions, and I feel like the information flows differently because they're able to pull things out of me. as opposed to like where it's just soundboarding by myself, which still, like, I feel like there's a lot of gold nuggets in here. It's just it's a different, I feel like it's a different outcome. So it'd be interesting to see, like, if I ever did a live Q&A on a specific subject, like what would be the result of that. So yeah, maybe we'll play with that later on. But if you have any more questions, I'm probably going to continue doing a series on like pure individuals, because I still have some more things that I wanted to cover. But I wanted to talk, I think I'm going to keep these a little bit shorter and more intentional, talk about like 1 or 2 things at a time. I say as I'm about like over 40 minutes in. But okay, I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, insight, questions, feel free to comment down below. As always, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is @JeannieSalcedo. There and on my website, you can find more information on different ways of working with me. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.